This episode is supported by Incogni. Let's be honest for 1 second. Do you also have this problem? Because this is a problem that I've been trying to solve for the past 3 months. Ever since leaving academia and leaving university, I find it increasingly hard to get down to some quality reading. And a lot of the times I can simply find alternatives in the form of podcasts, in the form of YouTube videos or Instagram reels that can give me that fix of knowledge. But the problem that I started facing recently is that there is simply too much stuff out there for us to consume. For example, one of my favorite podcasts is Dax Shepard's Armchair Expert. And of course, there's a whole lot of interesting stuff as a part of this podcast. There's Armchair Anonymous, there's Experts on Expert, and of course, there's just the Armchair Expert segment. And sometimes I have so much fun listening to these episodes that I tend to forget that I've literally dedicated 10 hours, at least 10 hours a week, to listening to the show, which is a substantial amount of time. And if you're courageous enough to dig into the archive of any popular podcast, you'd probably discover that in the backlog of any podcast, there's over 800 episodes. So for Armchair Expert right now, it is sitting at 786 episodes. That is like more than 2 consecutive months of listening to the show nonstop. So you wake up, you put the show on, and you can finish all of it in 2 months. And the worst part is, I'm probably very happy to put those 2 months of consecutive listening time in, but at the same time, I think to myself, these podcasts are updating themselves every single week. For example, Armchair Expert releases 3 new episodes every single week. And of course, there's a new podcast just around the corner. And of course, there's my podcast on the horizon if you want to listen to some interesting conversations with interesting people. Content genuinely seems infinitely generative. It's like Hydrus, right? One comes out of the ground, you listen to it, you mark it as played, and immediately 3,000 other podcast episodes start to drop. So I want to pose a genuine question. Don't get mad at me right now. How in the hell does reading have any competitive power in this age where content is infinitely interesting, it's infinitely generative, there's so much of it out there, you can basically find what you need after a click of a button? Because let's face it, number one, reading takes a lot more effort than listening to a podcast, and number two, the entertainment value of reading definitely pales in comparison. And maybe this is the post-graduation blues speaking, but the more I engage with these new forms of entertainment, the more I started to realize, man, we need to really articulate a new argument for reading. Otherwise, there really isn't much of a reason for us to read more books. Of course, I'd like to be one of those people who assigns absolute good to this act of reading, but I'm the kind of guy who likes to analyze given data and to sort of make up my own mind. And honestly, right now, there's not a lot of data indicating that reading is going to get more interesting. But after a while of researching, after a while of thinking about this topic, and after doing some research in my field of literary theory, what if I told you that there's one thing that this infinite content flywheel can't achieve? What if there's one thing that only books and reading fiction can give you that these media outlets don't really give you? And what if I told you understanding this one thing is going to give you a huge kick in the ass when you want to get down to some quality reading? And welcome back to another video in the series called Essentials. And today we'll talk about the power of literary form and how it might just be the last stronghold that we have against the infinite content flywheel. Now, fictions and stories may shape the way that we see the world, but did you know that there's another thing that's shaping our world silently? And that thing is the information being collected about you. So every time you browse the internet, every time you click on a YouTube video like this one, and every time you hop on the internet and click a link from a suspicious looking email, data brokers are quietly building a profile on you, your name, your address, even your shopping habits, and they're selling it. So true story, this happened to me back in 2023. I was a university student at the time, and you know how those times were. You're broke, you're thinking about where your next meal is going to come from. So all of a sudden, I received this text telling me that I had this unpaid toll violation that I needed to pay up right here, right now. The message sounded so official, had my full name, full address, full everything. So I went into a bit of a panic and I entered my credit card details, only to realize that I actually don't have a car. But it was way too late, so I checked back into my spending account and realized that my grocery money for that entire month has been drained. And what followed was a month-long debacle with a bank where I had to basically verify my details 10 times over, where I had to get in touch with 6 people just to get my money back. So long story short, that was a massive hassle, especially during that time when I was facing my finals at university. And if you ever ever see suspicious looking emails and phone calls telling you that your phone number will get deactivated in a week? Note that this is all a result of these brilliant data brokers doing their jobs, selling your data on the internet. So to prevent such buffoonery from happening again, here's where Incogni comes in. Incogni is a powerful data removal service that contacts these companies on your behalf and forces them to delete your private information. Normally, getting your data removed could take hours of your time and hundreds of emails and legal loopholes, but with Incogni, it's simply automated. You sign up, they handle the rest, and your online footprint starts to disappear. So take control of your story. Don't let these data brokers write it for you. Go to incogni.com/Walden and use the code Walden for a 60% discount on your annual subscription plan. That is incogni.com/Walden, because some stories pertaining to your personal privacy are better left untold. Thank you, Incogni, for supporting this episode. Now, back to the show. So let us return to this idea that content on the internet seems to be so generative, so infinite, you can't really keep up with it. But have you ever asked yourself the question, are you actually learning anything by consuming an enormous amount of content? This is something I've been trying to make sense of in my head because in aggregate, I've probably listened to like 100 podcast episodes in the last 2 weeks alone, and I think I'm not that much smarter compared to how I was from 2 weeks ago. And this is that moment when I started to realize maybe, Robin, put down your podcast playing app, put down Apple Podcast, and go back to a book. And I started reading one of these books that I've always wanted to read since I was a college student, Michel Foucault's The Order of Things. And one of the first chapters really illuminated something that I think is especially relevant for today's infinite content discourse. Long story short, The Order of Things by Michel Foucault asks the question, how is human knowledge structured throughout history and how has it changed? So Foucault essentially argued in this brief explanation of 16th century knowledge that people in the 16th century and the Renaissance tend to organize knowledge along the lines of resemblance. And this resemblance has value only from the accumulation of all the others. And the whole world must be explored if even the slightest of analogies is to be justified and finally take on the appearance of certainty. So in simple terms, if you want to know everything about a specific thing, you need to collect all the data on that thing. So in today's context, if you want to know how to exercise better or lose weight, you want to accumulate everything that remotely resembles this topic that you're trying to study. And the internet is such a brilliant place to search for this kind of information. There are probably like hundreds of diet plans that you can go on, hundreds of supplements that you can take to resolve this issue that you have, giving rise to this idea of like more is better. And as Foucault writes, the only possible form of link between the elements of this knowledge is addition. And addition, especially in our immediate context, is really the silent tool or the silent principle of how we create and consume content. I need another diet to go on, or I need a different app for doing my taxes, or I need this new productivity tool to organize my schedule. So the best solution here reveals itself not through a process of thinking about it really hard or experimentation, but it simply is a result of knowing enough about this thing through a process of endlessly tacking on more data points. And this is when we fall into the trap of reading 10 self-help books without getting out of bed. And this is how we fall into the trap of listening to 20 business podcasts and personal finance podcasts without really understanding how our bank apps work. And when we encounter some sort of interpersonal relationship drama and conflicts, we like to watch a whole lot of videos about it without realizing that this kind of knowledge condemned itself to never knowing anything but the same thing, and to knowing that thing only at the unattainable end of an endless journey. Does that ring a bell? Once we've attained enough information about a certain topic, you'd realize that it's all starting to sound the same. If you listen to all these experts' interviews about a specific topic, there's just a few points that get rebranded again and again and again just to keep up with the appearance that they're generating something new with every episode, without realizing that maybe we are engaging in this game of never knowing anything but the same thing. We all know what to do, but it seems to be the case that there's always more to consume. Hence, we've condemned ourselves to an endless journey of knowing, an endless journey of addition. And this is how the entire internet economy works. It thrives on being infinitely available to you. But coming back to the original topic, how does reading even survive in our attention economy? How does reading even counteract this this realm of infinite possibilities, because books is basically, it starts and it finishes. And how does this physical form even compete with this more entertaining form of media? I'm glad you asked. And recently I've been head deep in this book called How Fiction Works by the literary critic James Wood. And I think this book is so excellent in summarizing all the important practices and all the important principles behind fiction reading. And in one of my favorite chapters on literary form, Wood articulated a unique power of fiction. Life strikes us as essentially formless. It's protein. It's about the process of endlessly becoming, proud of its built-in obsolescence. This rings true to so many aspects of our lives. Technology's ever evolving, but they all tend to have this built-in expiry date, and I think my iPhone 13 right now is suffering some technological strokes right now, and I think it's on its way out. So that is precisely its built-in obsolescence. It's always evolving. There's always a new phone that looks the same as this one, and when it comes down to achieving our own goals, the goalpost is ever moving. You can become someone, but instantly you're going to be bored with that person. And now here you are looking for another goal to achieve and looking for another person to become. But the reality is, no matter how much you acquire, no matter how much work you do on yourself, reality is still going to look mundane to you. You're still going to wake up in the same bed. You're still going to be thinking about the same thoughts. And you're still going to feel like a dumbass no matter how many podcasts and books that you read. And when we're caught up in these endless loops of achievement, endless loops of becoming, life starts to accelerate. And this is something that I started feeling more and more of as of late. Weeks turning to days, and months turning to days, and years simply turning to a little month. And years go by without you realizing that, holy crap, I have not spent a single second recounting what I've done for the past year. And life will gradually start to degenerate into these mere happenings with no narrative, with nothing to ground you down. And basically, we find ourselves clueless in these times of endlessly becoming something else. Unless we take special care to remember what we've done and to narrate it. And this is where fiction reading comes in. So fiction ideally offers us a power we tend to lack in our own lives, to reflect on the form and direction of our existence, to see the birth, development, and the end of a complete life. This is the true power of reading fiction, or the true power of reading something like a biography of someone that you admire. In our daily lives, we're so good at putting commas behind every action that we do without really noticing the significant events in our lives and without realizing that we are completely different people compared to ourselves from a few years ago. But fiction and literary forms, they offer us one of the last resources for us to put this full stop on our lives. Sometimes reading a story about a certain person, reading a whole narrative, a complete narrative, or even watching a movie with a complete narrative arc will temporarily give our life a sense of stability. It offers us a certain negative power and shows us when things are supposed to stop. It places an almost sacred border around the artwork and says, this is not identical with the claims of the world. This is a space that demands a certain degree of strangeness, apartness, submission, significance. And when we actively seek out these hard borders in fiction, when we actively seek out a complete narrative, and we actively try out some of the techniques in these novels to narrate our own lives, it anchors our lives down to a stable temporal narrative. It's the perspective that we need from zooming out of our busy lives to see what's really going on. And it is the antidote to this need to constantly become another thing, the need to constantly acquire more information, and the need to constantly know a lot about the same thing. So in a world where we are endlessly at risk of becoming formless through this desire to endlessly become something else, literature acts as a site of concentration, critique, surplus, and as the stillness at the eye of the storm. So in other words, sometimes reading fiction is not just a pastime that looks cute, but in fact, it can be viewed as a spiritual practice to give our lives the gravity of narration. Thank you so much for watching another video of Essentials. I really enjoy scripting these ones and editing these ones for you guys. But nevertheless, I hope that you're having a great day, great evening, great morning, wherever you are. And I'll see you in another episode of Essentials. Take care, and I'll see you next time.